When starting a presentation like this, everyone has the same cunning plan. We search throughout the internet looking for a similar presentation, and what do? We just use it, or right, I'll put it simple, we copy it. But we don't favor that idea, because on the one hand, there's something called the UFOS software that detects cheating students. But on the other hand, there are students that have some kind of moral standards, some norms and values that say, don't lie, don't cheat, always be honest. Well, the study of these moral standards will be the principle of our presentation. Furthermore, business ethics will be the study of this presentation. We know what business is, we know what ethics are, because I recently told you. So we can find business ethics as the study of moral standards in business relations, business policies, business institutions, and so on. I'm sure you have all noticed that business ethics are a sort of applied ethics. I will summarize this all in one simple sentence, that the business ethics of a leading firm are the core values, the basic rules of that company. I know this all sounds a bit boring and totally irrelevant, but actually business ethics has a large field of application. A few weeks ago there was a huge rebellion against the bank bonuses policies of Dexia and KBC. Why? Well, because Dexia and KBC, they decided to accord a variable remuneration of approximately 500,000 euros to their CEOs on top of their already outrageous fixed income. As a reaction to these unreasonable results, the City Council of Ghent, they decided to withdraw all their liquid assets from Dexia and KBC. That's about $30 billion. The City Council, euros, I'm sorry. The City Council of Ghent, they wanted to make a statement and they wanted to react to these amounts. And what they're actually saying is, we are ethical, we have a vision on society, and the vision that you have on society doesn't comply with our vision on society. We are ethical and you aren't, so sorry, you are good, we are bad. We are good and you are bad. When studying business ethics, the counter-reaction of Dexia and KBC to the decision of the City Council of Ghent is almost as important. What did they say? Well, Dexia, they sent a formal letter where they emphasized that their wage policy is in full accordance with European legal instructions. To put it simple, they're just saying, we've done everything by the book, we're good, we're cool. This type of communication would be a very important part of our presentation, and it's called crisis management. I know you all heard about it. I think it's time to introduce the topics of our presentation. The topics of our presentation will be conflict of interest, where Peter will tell you all about it. Next, business ethics and environmental issues. I think you all know the name of greenwashing. Martin will tell you more about that one. And finally, crisis management, I already told you. And first in line is Peter with conflict of interest.
A common problem in business ethics is how to handle a conflict of interest. First of all, I'd like to explain to you what a conflict of interest exactly is. A conflict of interest is also known as a COI, occurs when an individual or organization is involved into multiple interests, one of which probably corrupts the motivation for an act and the other. You can believe that in business, where a lot has to do with decision making, conflict of interest frequently occur. One of the probably best known examples of COI in business is about Arthur Andersen and Enron. By having multiple roles as a consultant, tax advisor, preparer, and auditor, the accounting firm Arthur Andersen could not be objective in its actions. And eventually, after some fraudulent acts of the Enron board, Arthur Andersen had to save the appearances because Enron was too important as a client. When the news came out, both companies went bankrupt. Of course, it's a lot more complex than that, but I'd just like to show you how a conflict of interest has destroyed two leading firms. However, the Arthur Andersen case and Enron case was about 10 years ago, back in 2001, 2000. Nowadays, we have a lot more legal restrictions to prevent such relations and its consequences. When doing some research, I found some tips to avoid or prevent conflict of interest. First of all, make sure you don't hire board members of other competing companies. It's like shooting yourself in the foot. It sounds obvious, but it happens. Secondly, avoid nepotism. Nepotism is, for example, promoting a relative of yourself. Those actions could have an influence on your view on your view of their performances. Further, with business life always separate from personal life. For example, a Romans on work phone can happen. These days there are special contracts so people can come out of it and try to carry on doing their job as professional as possible in corporation. Government can also interfere by all sorts of laws and rules. So these 4 central points might help you to avoid conflict of interest. So in general, we can conclude that nowadays there are a lot more ways to create conflict of interest, but on the other side, ways to avoid them have increased too, mostly due to a wider legal framework on these kind of issues.
Yes. I will talk to you about greenwashing. Greenwashing is a type of unethical behavior when companies pretend to be environmentally friendly or responsible when they're not. You can say that it's whitewashing, but with a green brush. Since the mid-60s, the environment has become a hot topic. The ozone hole and global warming aren't just stories invented to make us scared. They are real problems. And if nothing happens, if we do nothing, we all have to live with the consequences. And just because of the fact that it's a problem everyone has to deal with, nature has become so popular. Companies also started to behave environmentally conscious. But the question is, of course, whether they do this for nature or just to make themselves more popular with consumers. We actually talk about greenwashing when a company spends more money and time on advertising being green rather than spending resources on environment-friendly practices. In April 2010, Ubisoft announced that they were going to abandon paper manuals for their Xbox and PlayStation games and use digital manuals instead. Of course, they did this all just for nature. They didn't tell the part where it cuts a lot of costs for Ubisoft. This is an example of greenwashing because they tell the people that it is a decision to be more green when it's actually a decision to cut more costs. I saw a presentation about the 6 sins of greenwashing, and I really thought they were worth mentioning. So, the first sin of greenwashing is the sin of sibbing. What does it mean? It means that companies simply lie. They tell us things that aren't true. Luckily, it's not a huge issue because it doesn't happen a lot. The second sin is the sin of no proof. Few companies are willing to provide proof that their products truly are ecological, possibly because they haven't even been tested yet. Another sin is the sin of irrelevance. As a company, you can make a statement that is true, but also completely irrelevant, completely meaningless. In the presentation, the speaker gave an example about shaving cream that said that it was CFC-free. We all know that CFCs, or chlorofluorocarbons, are bad for the environment, but they also have been legally banned since 1980s. So of course it's CFC-free because it has to be CFC-free. The fourth sin is the sin of the hidden trade-off. What does it mean? It means that companies focus the consumer's attention on one single environmental issue, even though that issue might be nothing compared to other polluting or poisoning products the company uses. The fifth sin is the sin of vagueness. A lot of people don't really know what 100% natural really means or what eco-friendly really means. It all sounds very good, very ecological, but is it as ecological as we think? Does it really mean what we think it means? Most of the time it doesn't, of course. The last sin is the sin of the lesser of two evils. There are eco-friendly Hummers nowadays. Hummers or cars are really bad for the environment, they pollute a lot. But eco-friendly Hummers pollute a little less. Still, they're not very good for the environment, very bad actually, but they're a little less bad than regular Hummers, so they're the lesser of two evils. That's it for greenwashing. Joost will tell you a little more about the crisis.
Thank you for this interesting contribution. Business ethics are also involved in crisis management. First I will tell you about the concept of crisis management, and then I will illustrate the business ethics and actions of crisis management using an example. Crisis management is a way in which an organization behaves in situations where the company or its stakeholders or the general public is harmed. There are three elements that are commonly used in defining a crisis situation. And first is, of course, obviously, a threat to the organization. Secondly, there has to be an element of surprise, otherwise it's just a normal problem. And finally, it has a short decision time. Now, the example, probably the most cited example of crisis management is the Johnson & Johnson case. In 1982 and 1986, the capsules of a painkiller, Tylenol, has been tampered with cyanide. That's a chemical compound that is poisonous for humans. And this incident led to the death of 6 people in the first case, and another death in 1986. At first sight, the reaction of Johnson & Johnson was a prototypical example of efficient and ethical crisis management, and they reacted very quickly and responsible by recalling 31 million capsules of the Tylenol medicine, and that has a value of more than $100 million, so that was really a big recall. And many observers praise Johnson & Johnson's lack of defensiveness, and they also praise their acknowledgement of their responsibility to protect the public. In fact, you could also say that Johnson & Johnson reacted according to their mission statement. Their mission statement stress their ethical responsibility to all of its stakeholders. However, before the Tylenol case, similar drugs such as aspirin had already been tampered with deadly substances on several occasions. So when we take this this previous incident into account, we might consider that it's not a question if Johnson & Johnson handled ethical, but why didn't Johnson & Johnson then protect its Tylenol products before previous crisis? That's another question you can say, and that's not so ethical. So if I may conclude, I can say that a more ethical strategy would be to include also a thorough evaluation of the potential crisis that could arise with their products. I hope you all enjoyed our presentation, and I hope you have a good idea now of what business ethics is about and how important it can be in several situations. And I thank you all for listening, and if there are any questions, feel free to ask them. Thank you.
Okay, the next theme